Prefect's personal log. Stardate 5244 3.86. She will not leave me be. Every day, every single day, she hounds me. By her presence, by her thoughts, she always finds a way. Even after we install the telepathic dampers, she finds any excuse to visit me, bombarding me with endless conversations and endless gifts. She's determined to dress me up like a doll. Every day, I'm forced to endure her incessant gossiping and innuendos. I can't even escape by leaving the compound. Everywhere I go, she's in my head, constantly babbling away, making obscene comments and sending me visions of her body. There's no escaping her. Truly, if I had known what was waiting for me on this vile little planet, I'd have taken any other assignment. They could have sent me to the Romulan front for all I care. No, this infernal woman, she will be the death of me.
From January to April of 2375, the Federation 10th and 16th Fleets, along with the Romulan Black Legion and Klingon Daughters of Death, formed an unstoppable phalanx, undoing all the gains made by Sayaran, liberating system after system, greeted by ever larger, jubilant crowds who had begun to see the true colours of the increasingly desperate Dominion. On the northern side of the Kalandra front, the Allies were equally persistent. During January, the Federation's 7th, 10th and 15th Fleets drove the Dominion out of Baradis. Meanwhile, the Klingon 8th Kahless Chosen punched through the Dominion lines to Tarkan, leaving the Dominion-held system of Betazoid in an exposed salient, surrounded on three sides, until finally, in May, it was cut off completely from Dominion lines. This had in fact been the Federation plan all along. As far back as October 2374, when Betazoid had first been captured in the opening moves of the Kalandra offensive, Starfleet had begun planning for its liberation, even choosing the commander who would lead this campaign, Fleet Admiral Thaddeus Grax of the First House of Betazoid.
I knew what the Dominion had planned for my home. They wanted to turn it into a killing field, for us to throw wave after wave of ships at the defenses which we had built. They rightly believed we couldn't allow the continued occupation of a home world. But my duty was first and foremost to the Federation.
By cutting off and surrounding Betazoid, Grax hoped to minimize casualties. Betazoid and neighbouring Makkos were only held by Jem'hadar Fleet Alpha 7 and the Cardassian 21st Order. There was no way they would be able to hold out against his task force, which already included over 400 Starfleet ships and the Romulan Black Legion. Yet even then, Grax was hesitant to attack. His hope was that at the very least the Cardassians would realise that they were surrounded and surrender. He even held some hope that the Jem'hadar would run out of Ketracel White. Yet, as May turned to June, these hopes failed to manifest.
Grax was right to believe that we'd surrender any day. After all, Betazoid is such an infamously inhospitable planet. We were truly suffering. We weren't used to such hardships. Our morale might have crumbled at any moment.
Grax soon realised that he had underestimated his foe when in June the Dominion launched a foolhardy counterattack, sacrificing the entire First Guard's order just to allow the 20th Order to reinforce Betazed. At this point, it became clear to Grax that something greater was afoot on Betazed.
2 fleets, that's a distraction. But sacrificing another just to add a third, the Dominion was guarding something on Betazed. Something important.
By July of 2375, Betazed had been under Dominion occupation for 10 months. During that time, they had made sure to consolidate and fortify their position. As a member homeworld, Betazed was protected by numerous, if antiquated, defences. It was only by Federation neglect of these systems that the Dominion was able to bypass and penetrate these defences so easily, a courtesy that the Dominion had no intention of returning. Upon taking control of the planet, the restoration of its defences took first priority. This task was entrusted to Grand Gull Lamech, who was also to supervise the construction of the new station in orbit over Betazed, named Sentok Nor. However, overall control of the planet and star system was given to Legate Tolmec and his Dominion advisor, Vorta Nylan. They were to be responsible for securing Dominion rule on the planet and ensuring compliance in the population. However, it should be noted that Tolmec was not the first Cardassian prefect. By the time he took office in February of 2375, there had in fact been 3 prior prefects, all of whom had resigned inside of a month after arriving. Tolmec soon realised what had driven the others away.
The Betazoids are not Bajorans. The Bajorans had the decency to openly defy you, to look you in the eye and spit in your face given the chance. But the Betazoids, they would feign submission. They'd wink and smile as they walked past, as if they were merely playing along with some secret joke. It was infuriating. And then, of course, there was her.
Luoxana Troy, daughter of the 5th House of Betazed, holder of the sacred chalice of Rix, and heir to the holy rings of Betazed, became a frequent acquaintance of the Dominion occupiers. Despite nearly being killed during the invasion, as her house nearly collapsed on her during the Dominion barrage, she only survived thanks to her manservant, Mr. Hom, who held up the ceiling long enough for her to escape, giving his life for hers. Yet, despite this, publicly she adopted a very conciliatory tone towards Betazed's new Dominion occupiers, stating that this was an opportunity to embrace and educate the enemy in the virtues of peace.
She knew what she was doing. Words like unity and cooperation, they were just euphemisms, something my partner could never wrap his head around. No, she was deliberately trying to humiliate us. By going out of her way to make us feel welcome, she demonstrated just how unwelcome we actually were.
However, few Betazoids acted in the spirit of these conciliatory statements, actively working to make life for their occupiers as inconvenient as possible. With their telepathic abilities, the Betazoids were able to organise almost spontaneously without any traditional means of communication. The Dominion was soon plagued with hundreds of acts of civil disobedience every single day.
It was bloody impossible! You'd institute a curfew and they would ignore it. Try to reserve a street to move cargo or equipment, they'd all be there, finding 1,000 little ways to ruin your day. If I'd have had it my way, I would have started executing them at random until they got the message. But Nylan disagreed.
The true authority on Betazed was Vorta Nylan. Unlike his Cardassian colleagues, he preferred to govern with the lightest possible hand. Rather than arrest suspected organisers and dissidents, Nylan would employ soft methods to disrupt the resistance movement. Suspected ringleaders would be given promotions or transferred away from their local area. Businesses suspected of holding resistance meetings would enjoy greater patronage from Cardassian officers on Vorta. Certain Cardassian officers were even given cultural sensitivity training, so that they could fraternize with the Betazoid population. These soft tactics characterized the first few months of the Dominion occupation, yet underneath this benign veneer, disappearances became increasingly common.
He was a sick bastard, that Nylon. Even with me he'd played a fool, pretending he didn't know what was really going on. But he did. We all did. We all knew what was happening. After all, we'd already done this before.
After surrounding Betazed again in July, Admiral Grax began planning his assault. From August 2nd to August 16th, Grax began a campaign of probe attacks, sending waves of over 500 probes a day. While Dominion perimeter patrols would intercept and destroy most of these probes, a few would enter the system's perimeter before being destroyed by the automated defences. And so slowly, day by day, Grax was building up a picture of the Dominion defences. The longer these probe attacks went on, the more likely Grax would find the gap he was looking for.
With a planet like Betazed, there's only so much recon you can do. We obviously knew what defenses we had left behind, so the only other piece of the puzzle was what additions the Dominion had made. After the first week, we had a pretty good idea of what would be waiting for us, but we kept it up because it made them nervous. It reminded them that all they could do was sit and wait.
Soon enough, Cardassian commanders began imploring Tolmec to authorize a raid, exactly as Grax hoped. However, with the recon probes revealing the construction of Sentok Nor, Grax was under pressure from his own officers to act sooner rather than later. Eventually, on the 25th of August, Grax authorized a reconnaissance raid with the light battle groups of the 7th, 10th, 37th, 15th and 22nd Fleets, comprising nearly 100 ships. This would be the largest raid of the war hitherto, and would test the Dominion defences to their limits. The attack began at 0221 on the 28th of August, as the Federation fleet under Vice Admiral Haftel dropped out of warp just beyond the system's perimeter, each battle group detaching a single wing to perform staggered probing attacks on the defences in order to draw out the picket patrols. Yet, none of these pickets emerged, forcing Haftel to escalate his attacks, now ordering the full battle groups to engage the perimeter defences. This did elicit a response from the Dominion, though not in the form Haftel expected, with Jem'hadar battlecruisers and Cardassian galors arriving at the perimeter to drive off Haftel's frigates and light cruisers. But as Haftel's ships fell back, the Dominion ships stayed put, remaining in range of their own defence perimeter, refusing to give the customary chase. At this point, Haftel should have retreated with the intelligence he had gained. Instead, he continued the attack. It was not until 0600 that Haftel withdrew, as he received a recall order from Admiral Grax, some 4 hours too late, as the Dominion had launched their own raid. Consisting of the light divisions of the 20th and 21st Order, as well as 54 Jem'hadar ships, Grand Gull Lamech had obtained permission to launch a raid on the Federation starbase on MacLeod, with their light battle group away on mission. The remaining cruiser and destroyer battle groups of the 7th Fleet were too slow and ungainly to respond to the sudden Dominion incursion. Even the Galaxy Wing was simply overwhelmed by the speed and number of Dominion ships, which passed through their lines like sand through a sieve. Only 3 minutes after entering the system, the raiding party reached the starbase. The first waves of Jem'hadar fighters began diving on the base. While their weapons could not penetrate the base's shields, they successfully drew the attention of its defences, allowing 11 Kulanor frigates to open fire from orbit with their newly fitted plasma lancers. Soon enough, the Kulanors broke the starbase shields, and the successive waves of Sartans and Ryzalax launched torpedoes, obliterating the starbase, killing 500 personnel, 3,000 civilians, and destroying over 10,000 bombardment caliber torpedoes and other crucial supplies for Grax's fleet. While Haftel suffered no casualties during his raid, and Lamech had lost 50 ships in his own, the Dominion clearly emerged from this exchange far better than the Federation, as over 6 months' worth of supplies stockpiled in anticipation of the assault on Betazed went up in flames, and with them, Grax's plan. Even so, having led troops since the beginning of the war, Grax was used to suffering setbacks and already began preparing his contingency. Unfortunately, Grax would not be the only one to suffer a setback. On the 31st of October, 2375, the Breen entered the war on the side of the Dominion. While the fighting remained far from Betazed, Grax still suffered the consequences of this latest setback, with his largely fresh fleets now being plundered to make up for losses elsewhere on the front.
Of course now, I see the bigger picture, but at the time, I was furious. I'd been given a mission only to have the tools ripped out of my hands. Maybe I should have been firmer with my subordinates, but when everyone's telling you the same thing, when everyone is saying go, even when you know it's the wrong call, it's easy to cave.
With his fleet reduced from 480 to 380 ships, Grax's capacity to assault the Dominion defences on Betazed was seriously diminished. Only the Romulan Black Fleet remained untouched. But Tomalok was extremely reluctant to risk his warbirds against fortified Dominion positions. To make matters worse, the Dominion continued to mount raids and other attacks designed to degrade and demoralise Grax's force. Tolmec, seeming more than happy to expend wave after wave of attack ships in the process. By this time, the situation on Betazed had deteriorated significantly. No longer did the Betazoid people playfully smile at their Dominion guests. No longer did Cardassian officers casually waltz along brightly lit streets. On Betazed, only 2 kinds of being remained: predators and prey. And in the ranks of the Dominion and the Betazoid population resided both. In the previous months, more and more Betazoids had taken up with the resistance movement as the Dominion began to tighten its grip. No longer was the Dominion concerned with its public image, only in accomplishing its goal on Betazed. The Jem'hadar began to make arbitrary arrests in order to supply Lamech with the slave labour he needed to finish Sentok Nor, and with the help of Dr. Krell Muset, Cardassian officers, increasingly fearful of telepathic reprisals, erected telepathic suppression fields around their compounds. However, Muset was not simply there to aid in the security of the occupation, having arrived in June with one simple mission: to learn the secrets of Betazoid telepathy at any cost.
When Dr. Moset arrived, that's when things changed. I've never been squeamish when it comes to the essentials of business. But with Moset, I just made sure he got his consignments and didn't think any more of it.
In that time, the Betazoid resistance movement went from peaceful civil disobedience to ever more extreme methods, with some sabotaging key facilities and infrastructure, whilst others began carrying out telepathic assaults. However, this particular method was controversial even among the resistance, and was only deemed effective against Cardassians, though this was small consolation to the Cardassians who had to endure ever more extreme telepathic assaults when outside the protection of their compounds. On July 12th, the first casualty of a telepathic assault was recorded.
I was called in during the small hours of the night to see the first victim, a lowly Gore who had arrived the same time as my own detachment. I walked in to see this fine figure of a young man reduced to a shivering and gibbering mess. He would survive the encounter, but he was never the same again. There are many empathic and telepathic species in the galaxy, but I have never encountered a species in which it was so present, and to such a great magnitude. They were exactly what I was looking for.
With neither the ships or supplies to mount a full planetary assault, Admiral Grax was forced to look to alternative means to liberate his home. On the 9th of November, he was approached by Commander Deanna Troi of the Enterprise, who had a plan to liberate Betazed by using the greatest weapon it had: her people. Despite being a fleet admiral, even Grax himself was not privy to the full details of the plan, which had been devised by Starfleet intelligence and was to be carried out by Starfleet Marines. All Grax had to do was launch one more attack, and Commander Troi and her partners in Starfleet intelligence would handle the rest. On the 23rd of November, Grax launched his attack. Rather than attack the whole perimeter, Grax concentrated all his forces at one point, forcing the Dominion to do the same. For 10 hours, phasers screamed and torpedoes soared through the void as Grax's fleet exchanged fire with the Dominion, grinding their way through Dominion defences, gaining little ground, but also taking relatively few casualties, employing a single large column of attack. When the lead ships began to take damage, they would retreat to the back, and the second rank would continue the advance. As Tolmec and Nylan bickered over their enemy's intention, 200 Venture-class scout ships dropped out of warp on the far side of the system. Using active jamming alongside with Grax's distraction, it wasn't until they were virtually on top of the planet that they were detected, believing this to be a bombing raid against the Dominion command and control centers. After a few minutes, Tolmec emerged from under his desk as his compound remained standing, undamaged by any volleys of torpedoes. The scout ships had instead gone to ground in the remote regions of the planet, each one carrying with them a team of 20 Starfleet Marines. With his mission complete, Grax withdrew and now waited as the fate of his planet hung in the balance. While 4,000 Marines is not enough to liberate a world, it was believed by Starfleet intelligence to be enough to prompt its people to liberate themselves.
Ever since the Cardassian withdrawal from Bajor and the following Maquis crisis, we'd been investing our resources into understanding the nature of planetary insurrections. How a small group of well-trained and highly motivated insurgents can make a planetary occupation impossible.
However, there was one problem with this approach.
Betazoids, as a general rule, we are not a particularly belligerent people. Of course, we had our wars, but not in the way a lot of species have. When you can look into the mind of another person, feel their fear, killing, well, it's almost impossible for any Betazoid.
Yet, Commander Troi, who had joined this landing force, had already anticipated this issue and had come to Betazed with a solution. Yet, even if Troi was successful, and the people were willing to think the unthinkable, Betazed was still defended by 3 Dominion fleets, and should anything befall their comrades on the ground, the fleets above would be ready to carry out reprisals.
We knew that even if Troi and Trevon were successful, it would merely be a drop in the ocean. To be successful, an insurgency needs to overwhelm the occupier, to create a moment of crisis, and leave them no time or space to plan or organise a response.
On the 26th of December, Admiral Grax was ordered to prepare for one final, all-out assault. His orders were to engage the entire Dominion fleet and draw them away from Betazed and Sentok Nor, and hold them for as long as he could. On the 10th of January, 2376, Grax received his orders and began his attack, deploying into an extended line of battle and engaging the defense perimeter. With such a large force attacking, Tolmec was forced to send all his ships, leaving Betazed and Sentok Nor unprotected. Tolmec watched the battle unfold from his compound on Betazed, his eyes frantically scanning his own lines and the Federation looking for the slightest hint that a unit might be faltering or about to break, the nagging feeling at the back of his mind.
Where are those fucking Romulans?
Like before, this engagement dragged on for hours. However, as Grax began taking losses, and with the help of a little Kanar, Tolmec's nerves began to soothe. That was until, at 1100, in quick succession, 3 calamities befell him. First, he witnessed the Romulan Black Legion decloak and lead a charge into the centre of his line. Second, he received word that the USS Defiant had been sighting speeding away from Sentok Nor, only to then be told a few moments later that the station had exploded. And shortly after that, one of his NCOs burst into the room, shouting something about the Jem'hadar dying. In these critical moments, Commander Troy and the 4,000 Starfleet Marines began storming Dominion compounds all over the planet. Word travelled fast, and most of the Cardassians surrendered immediately, whilst the few Jem'hadar left alive inside the compounds were left disorganised and unable to resist in any meaningful way. At 11:10, Commander Troy and a squad of Marines charged into Tolmec's office to find a stunned Tolmec, frozen, with a disruptor in his hand, and Vorta Nylan lying dead on the floor. In only 10 minutes, everything had changed. Sentok Nor was gone. The Cardassian fleet began surrendering en masse, although the Jem'hadar had no intention of giving up, carrying out suicide runs on both Federation and surrendering Cardassian ships. The fleet then pressed on to Betazed. Yet there were no jubilant crowds to greet them on the planet, only a broken enemy and a broken people. In a mass telepathic attack, 15,000 Jem'hadar were driven mad and died. 1,200 telepaths also died in the process. As the Defiant landed outside the capital, her crew emerged with over 100 starving and brutalized Betazoids who had been used as forced labor on Sentok Nor. A few days later, Starfleet Marines discovered one of Dr. Moset's laboratories and discovered the true extent of his work. 10,000 Betazoids were held captive, while the Marines found even more in freezers. Across his operations on the planet's surface and Sentok Nor, Dr. Krell Moset and his experiments had resulted in the deaths of at least 7,000 Betazoids. Starfleet Marines also soon discovered that Polaron charges had been placed in the planet's antimatter refinery and rigged for remote detonation. Tolmec would later reveal that this was to be Vorta Nylan's weapon of last resort, and the reason why he killed him.
No, I didn't shoot him because I had any love for Betazed. I didn't even shoot him to save the lives of my own men. I shot him because I didn't feel like dying there and then for him or his gods. No, I shot him because I was sick of him, not out of the goodness of my heart.
At the trials after the war, Dr. Krell Moset was found guilty of crimes against civilization, with at least 500 confirmed counts of murder, 900 counts of mutilation, and 5,000 counts of torture and other cruelty, and conspiracy to conceal these crimes. He was sentenced to 150 years on Deimos High Security Prison. This conviction was made possible not only by the testimony of liberated prisoners, but also the testimony of Grand Gul Lamek and Legate Tolmec, who were more than happy to bury their colleague. It was Moset that slowed the construction of the station by demanding his lab be finished first. It was Moset and his Vorta handlers who had led the occupation to develop its draconian and barbaric nature. Because of their testimony and cooperation, Gul Lamek was sentenced to 50 years, Tolmec 75, both were allowed parole after 25 years and were allowed to return to Cardassia to live out the remainder of their natural lives. There was only one question left unanswered at the Betazoid trials. Why? What was so important to the Dominion that so many had to die in such horrific ways? The only explanation was a cryptic statement by Dr. Masset during his trial.
Betazoids are such fascinating creatures. With their telepathic abilities, they can come to know one another so intimately that it is impossible for outsiders to even conceive. To come to know someone so deeply is quite a power. To know us better than we even know ourselves, well... Let us be thankful Betazoids cannot shapeshift as well, for that is truly terrifying to contemplate.